after the successful GAT X-102 Duel and GAT X-103 Buster, the Earth Alliance began work on the GAT X-105 Strike, arguably one of the most influential machines of the Cosmic Era, if not the most influential machine. Even though at first sight, the machine might not look like a lot. Worse yet, in its base form, the Strike looks like a straight up downgrade from the Duel. For weapons, it had the same shield and the same Eagle-Stellung 75mm Seawiz guns. Its beam rifle focused more on accuracy by replacing the underslung grenade launcher with a second handle, and instead of 2 beam sabers, it had 2 Armor Schneider knives, which were much weaker physical blades, although they were still capable of inflicting serious damage to a Jin. And it was very much the same story with the backpack. Instead of a high-performance backpack with a lot of thrusters, the Strike just gets some thrusters stuck to its back without anything that even looks like a backpack. Now, it would later on get some extra weapons, like the XM404 Grand Slam, which was stolen from Zaft, and a very versatile anti-mobile suit bazooka, which has 4 magazines, giving it a lot of capacity, and unlike the beam rifle, it can be used underwater and doesn't consume a lot of energy, which is of course very important for the Strike, because like all other Alliance Gundams, it uses the phase shift armor system. A very energy-hungry armor system that was able to block any and all physical attacks. But even with all of this, the Strike still felt underpowered when compared to its earlier sister units. But before I tell you about the Strike's ace up its sleeve, I want to tell you about FX Creations' official Gundam Seed collaboration. They've got a lot of things like all kinds of backpacks, bags, power banks, and much more, themed after the 3 main Gundam Seed Gundams: the Freedom, the Justice, and the Strike, which we're of course talking about in today's video. And they're all done in that style where the design doesn't scream anime, but for anyone who knows the series, it is immediately obvious what you're wearing. And let's start by having a look at the smallest thing they sent over, which also has the flashiest design of the bunch: the card case. It's got a clip on the back for cash and can easily hold over 15 different cards. So in go my Atheron ID card, Bana passport, Gundam base card, Konami e-amusement pass, my main Buzoshinki cards, these Nikkei cards that I have for no particular reason, and my important cards that I'm not showing for obvious reasons. And this thing can then easily be stored in the waist bag, in which you can also store other essentials like some cash, a lighter, or a piece of soda-flavored chewing gum. And thanks to its clip, you can easily attach it to the AGS Pro suspension backpack. This bad boy has over 24 liters of storage and can be packed with anything you need for your daily missions: a 15-inch tablet, 17-inch laptop, high-grade Strike, modeling tools, water bottles, and a Gundam water pistol. You know, the essentials. And not only does it have a padded back, but it's also got their signature AGS suspension system. This system uses a spring to absorb the shocks from walking to better protect your muscles and your spine. It's like movable frame technology, but to protect your back. And on top of that, it is water repellent and it's got a little bit of extra bling too. And if you still need some more storage, here's this crossbody bag, which you can attach to your belt or hang it from your shoulder with the removable strap and carabiner. It's water repellent and perfect to hold a phone. Or a Wonder Swan. And last but not least, we have this smooth, blueprint-esque floor mat that is also super absorbent in case you spill something on it. Or use it as target practice for your Gundam water pistol. So if you need some more justice in your life, you can get these items with links in the description down below and the top comment. And by using the code Kakarot, you'll get 10% off on any items you get. And now, back to the Strike Gundam and its ace, the Striker Pack system. By developing modular equipment sets, the Strike could be prepped for almost any combat situation within seconds, making it the most versatile unit around. And on top of extra weapons and thrusters, these packs also had extra batteries to extend the sortie time of the Strike. And to make sure that these Striker packs could be quickly exchanged, the Alliance's latest and greatest ship, the Archangel, was designed with switching out these Striker packs in mind. At first, 3 Striker packs were developed: the High Mobility All-Rounder Aile Striker pack, the Close Range Sword Striker pack, and the Heavy Firepower Long Range Launcher Striker pack. The Aile Striker pack was very simply a giant booster unit that was designed by Morgan Ray to enhance the mobility and speed of the Strike Gundam, both in space and on Earth. In space, this allowed the Strike to keep up with the Aegis's incredible speed and to operate alongside it, and on Earth it gave the Strike superior mobility, as well as quasi-flight capabilities. But this first iteration of the Aile Striker was incapable of sustained atmospheric flight, a deficiency that would be solved by later models like the ones used by the Strike Rouge, which we'll talk about later in this video, and the Slaughter Dagger, which I talked about in my dagger development history. These packs do look visually identical, minus the color in the case of the Slaughter Dagger, but they are capable of full independent atmospheric flight. In terms of weaponry then, the pack comes with 2 beam sabers, complemented by the Strike's standard beam rifle and shield. Later on, a space-only version would also be developed by the Fujiyama company, but while it did have improved performance in space, it didn't have the 2 beam sabers, significantly reducing the Strike's close combat capabilities. Which was not the case at all with the Sword Striker pack, a Striker pack that was pretty much built entirely around the Schwertgewehr anti-ship sword. It is described as 15.78 meters, but considering that it's longer than the nearly 18-meter tall Strike, I think it's safe to assume that they're only talking about the length of the blade and not the entire sword. But regardless of how long it actually is, the main goal of this thing was to slice and dice enemy ships as well as enemy mobile suits, something that it was actually used for the most throughout its service life. And thanks to the fact that its business end was sharpened as well and didn't rely on a beam, it could also be used when the Strike ran out of power or was forced into underwater combat, where standard beam weaponry could not be used. Also, for anyone wondering where the Gewehr part comes into play, which is German for gun, it has a small laser gun at the back end of the hilt. However, the version of the Sword Striker that was famously used by the Strike Gundam was a prototype version, and because of this, it had a more conventional beam emitter in its place. The laser gun was supposedly present in the later production versions of the Schwertgewehr though. To support this giant blade then, it came with the Panzer-Eisen rocket anchor, a compact buckler-esque shield with high defensive capabilities, and a multifunctional rocket-propelled grappling hook. The claw was powerful enough to destroy weaker armor, or it could be used to catch enemy mobile suits and then drag them within range of the Schwertgewehr. And to round up its equipment, it came with extra armor for the left shoulder, which also housed the Midas Messer beam boomerang. And so according to the original plan, this Striker pack would allow the Strike to engage in anti-ship combat alongside the Blitz and execute a pincer attack on the enemy fleet. Also, while all Striker packs do come with extra batteries, the one used on the Sword Striker is especially noticeable, and combined with its low energy consumption, this pack can last the longest of all 3 original Striker packs. And on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Launcher Striker pack, which focuses on heavy firepower. On the right shoulder, it has the Combo Weapons Pod, a weapon system that aimed to fix one of the main deficiencies of the Buster: the lack of dedicated close-range defensive weapons. It had a 120mm anti-ship Vulcan, which is also very effective against mobile suits and incoming missiles, and two multi-purpose 350mm gun launchers, which could fire a variety of ordnance like missiles and grenades. These could also lock onto multiple targets at once, again allowing the strike to better defend against incoming missile strikes. Its main offensive weapon then is the Agni 320mm high impulse cannon, a massive beam cannon with an equally massive power output that requires a support arm connected to the backpack to use it. And typically, the strike would even use both hands to hold the Agni for extra stability. But it was capable of operating it only with its left hand, which would then free up the right hand to use other weapons like the high energy beam rifle. Something that might not have been a bad idea, considering how much energy the Agni used up with a single shot. Despite extra batteries being installed on the backpack, repeated use of the Agni would rapidly drain the strike's energy. And because of this, it was actually possible for an energy cable from the Archangel to be connected to the Agni, turning the launcher strike into a mobile turret. Another downside of the pack was that it was very heavy without any extra thrusters to compensate. As a result, it had the lowest mobility of any version and was meant to operate in the back, providing covering fire for the other G weapons, alongside the Buster. However, all of these plans would become completely worthless when Zaf discovered the 5G weapons and managed to steal 4 of them, leaving only the Strike Gundam and its Striker packs in the hands of the Alliance. So now, the Strike would be fighting against the machines that it was designed to fight alongside. But it was throughout these fights that both the Strike and its pilot, Kira Yamato, would achieve their legendary status. A legend that almost ended at the Battle of the Marshall Islands, where the Aegis managed to destroy the Strike by self-destructing. And it's also at this point that the Strike's further development becomes a web of intrigue thanks to Orb's interesting relationship with the Alliance. In short, certain factions in Orb are in favor of the Alliance, whereas other factions aren't. Which is why Orb did collaborate with the Alliance to create the G-weapons in the first place, albeit in secret, but also why Orb was still against completely joining the Alliance. So, after the Strike got blown up by the Aegis, Orb managed to recover the Strike and set out to both fix it and extract all of its secrets. Because, even though Orb had helped them with building the 5G weapons, during which they also took the liberty to research the technology used in those G weapons, there were still some technologies that the Alliance kept to themselves and that Orb couldn't extract at the time. Technologies like the phase shift armor. And on top of that, not only did Orb get their hands on the original Strike Gundam, but all of its spare parts as well. Thanks to the general shittiness of the Alliance's leadership, the Archangel and her crew decided to defect and join Orb instead. And stored on board of the Archangel were the recaptured Buster Gundam and all of those spare parts. Spare parts that Orb used to build a second Strike, the Strike Rouge. An almost identical unit, with the only differences being that it had an AI support system for the pilot, its eyes were green instead of yellow, and it had a power extender. A system that gave the Strike Rouge more energy for its phase shift armor and beam weapons, and was also responsible for the red look of this strike variant. A bigger change then were the striker packs designed for it, like the Integrated Weapons Strike Pack or IWSP and the Ootori Striker Pack. But before we can talk about those, we have to go back to the original Strike Gundam. Because even though the 3 packs that came with the thing were usually used separately, the companies involved with their production also promoted the idea that they could be used together. This monstrosity of a striker pack was known as the Multiple Assault Striker, and the strike was now nicknamed the Perfect Strike. The only problem was that it wasn't quite as perfect as the name would want you to believe. It was in fact little more than all 3 striker packs duct taped together, with some extra battery packs precariously hanging off the Aile striker stabilizer fin in an attempt to give this thing a somewhat reasonable operational time. But even if we put those energy concerns to the side for a second, while all these weapons did theoretically allow the strike to deal with any threat at any range, it added a great deal of bulk and weight to the strike. And remember, even the launcher striker by itself was said to have a great impact. Now imagine how things must have been with all of this other extra stuff. But don't worry, in order to save on dead weight, empty batteries could be jettisoned. Perfect. Problem solved. Another problem was how difficult it was to operate with the large amount of varied weapons. Something that probably also wasn't helped by the fact that 2 of its main weapons, the Agni and the Schwertgewehr, were 2-handed weapons that were now being treated as single-handed weapons. As a result, the strike's original pilot would only use the striker packs in their original configuration. Although, according to some sources, there was a little bit of mixing and matching, but it wouldn't be until ace pilot Mula Flogger took over the controls that the perfect strike would enter combat. And despite booking very impressive results, the aforementioned problems led Mood to the same conclusion. The perfect strike wasn't so perfect after all. But this didn't stop the quest to combine the 3 striker packs into one, an endeavor now spearheaded by Orb. The IWSP was originally developed by PMP, but was dropped after running into many of the same problems as with the Multiple Assault Striker. It was difficult to use, heavy, and energy hungry. However, the project was picked up again by Morgan Rate at a later date, after they managed to overcome the energy problems by installing a more advanced battery pack. And by then equipping it to the Strike Rouge, it would get an even longer operating time thanks to its power extender. What didn't change though was how difficult it was to pilot with all of those different weapons. For ranged combat, it had 2 105mm cannons, 2 115mm railguns, a 57mm high-energy beam rifle, and the combined shield, which houses a 30mm 6-barrel Gatling gun and a Midas Messer beam boomerang. And because of its weight, it can cause balance issues by shifting the strike's center of gravity to the left. The main melee weapons then are 2 9.1-meter anti-ship swords, which are based on the Schwertgewehr. Their shorter length does make them easier to handle, and since they're purely physical swords, they also minimize energy usage. And what it got from the Aile Striker then is its speed, mobility, and the general shape of the pack. And in addition to that, it was also capable of self-sustained atmospheric flight. Originally, it was planned to mount this pack onto the Strike Rouge, which was piloted by Kigali Eula Alta, the daughter of Uzuminara Alta, the chief representative of Orb. a combination that no doubt would have been a great morale boost to the units fighting alongside her. But unfortunately, diplomatic relations between the Alliance and Orb were rapidly breaking down as the war entered a new period of major offensives. Desperate to get Orb and their facilities on their side, the Alliance invaded Orb, and Kigali didn't have time to master the extremely difficult to use IWSP, instead opting to launch with the upgraded Aile Striker pack, which was now capable of sustained atmospheric flight as well. So, outside of a few photo ops for propaganda purposes, the Strike Rouge would never use the impressive looking IWSP. Another issue that plagued the IWSP then was poor reliability and maintainability due to its highly complex structure. Something that did prompt Morganrate to continue developing this striker pack, eventually resulting in the Ootori striker pack, which was a simplified and therefore also more reliable version of the IWSP, which was also more powerful to boot. For ranged options, it still had the 57mm high energy beam rifle, but now also got a plethora of missile launchers, a railgun on the left side, and then for its most powerful weapon, a beam launcher on the right side. Essentially a downscaled version of the Launcher Striker's Agni. Meanwhile, its main melee weapon then was no longer downsized. The IWSP used two smaller physical blades, but the Ootori went with a single, large, beamified blade. I guess energy conservation was less of an issue for the Ootori than it was for the IWSP. And what it also had were drop tanks with Mirage colloid particles for some reason. The exact details are unknown, but since these are the particles that are mainly known for cloaking the Blitz, it is most likely for some kind of stealth system. Finally then, the Ootori also had the capability to operate as its own independent unit. And if similar units are anything to go by, it can either be remote controlled by the Strike or controlled by an AI. And fortunately, Kigali was able to master the Ootori, and she would actively use it in combat during the Second Bloody Valentine War. Until it was destroyed when she lent it to her brother. But this wasn't as big of a problem as it might seem, because Orb still had a top secret ace up its sleeve, the strikingly golden Orb-01 Akatsuki Gundam. The amalgamation of everything Orb had learned from the Strike combined with their own top-of-the-line technology. And it was precisely because this was such a high-tech unit that its development was very protracted. We don't know exactly when it began, but supposedly it was being worked on at the same time the Strike was in development, with any and all data they managed to acquire from the Strike and the other G weapons immediately being implemented. Which I guess then makes it somewhere in between a sister unit and a development from the Strike. And because of this, it's also rumored that the base mobile suit was already completed even before Orb got invaded by the Alliance in the First Bloody Valentine War. But the Akatsuki Gundam at this time was still a pretty different unit. It didn't have its golden armor yet, and not even its weapon systems were completed. And even without all that, the development costs of the Akatsuki were already ballooning. Combine this with the fact that it was meant as a standard mass production machine and not an ace machine, and you can see why Orb put its development on halt. With the threat of the Alliance's invasion looming overhead, they instead put everything they had in the production of the M1 Astray, a mobile suit that was ready to be produced. But as we all know, this wasn't where the story of the Akatsuki ended. After the First War, development would continue, and there was also a shift in design philosophy. Based on the performance of the Gundam-type machines and their ability to single-handedly change the course of a battle, it was decided to also turn the Akatsuki into such a machine. A decision that then led to the Akatsuki that we all know and love today. But of course, also a decision that made the already expensive Akatsuki even more ridiculously expensive. Its armor might not be actual gold, but at this point, that probably would have been cheaper, because it is a highly complex set of nanoscale beam diffracting lattice layers and ultra-fine critical plasma suppression layers. This armor by itself can already deflect any beam attack thrown at it, including a battleship-class positron cannon. But on top of that, thanks to the Akatsuki sensors, the attack is sent right back at the one who fired it. And this wasn't just limited to beam attacks. The armor also allowed the Akatsuki to penetrate beam shields. And the name of this system was the Yata no Kagami, literally meaning the 8 Ata mirror, with Ata being an ancient Japanese unit of measurement. And in real life, the Yata no Kagami is one of the 3 sacred treasures of the Japanese imperial family. But there were 2 main problems with this system, and the first one was price. Getting a whole mobile suit outfitted with just this armor system would cost the equivalent of producing over 20 M1 Astrays. As a side note though, I know that this is meant to be like, wow, that is so expensive. No wonder they only made one. But given the attrition rates that we see in the Cosmic Era, I think that this could actually be a bargain. But the second problem could be more substantial. The Yata no Kagami was developed with the future battlefield in mind, where the designers falsely assumed that only, or at the very least mostly, beam weapons would be used. And as a result, it offers no added protection against physical attacks. And while beam weapons did become the norm, physical attacks were still very present on the battlefield, oftentimes as secondary weapons, but sometimes even as main weapons. And to deal with this, the Akatsuki had 2 options, both of which would rely heavily on the skill of the pilot. Dodge, or tank the attack with the small portion of regular armor on its Type 71 experimental defensive shield, which, despite its name, could also be used offensively thanks to its sharpened edge. Also, despite being able to block ranged beam attacks, melee beam attacks could still penetrate the Yata no Kagami, and to make matters worse yet, the joints weren't even coated, making for some weak points that could be exploited by an enemy ace. So, despite being an amazing system, it is more difficult to handle than it might appear at first. Moving on to the Akatsuki's own weapons. It's got a pair of M2 M5D 12.5mm Seawiz guns, which are the same model as the Todesrecken Seawiz guns that are used by the Alliance, the Type 73J2 experimental twin beam saber, which can be used either together or separately, and are stored onto the left side skirt, and the Hyakurai Type 72 D5 beam rifle. a development of the Strike's beam rifle with a few new tricks up its sleeve. It has superior firepower and speed, and instead of the second handle, it now has a mounting hole for the beam sabers, turning them into a beam bayonet. And when not in use, the beam rifle can be stored onto the right side skirt. The real firepower then comes from the Akatsuki's version of the Striker packs, the Oowashi Sky Pack and the Shiranui Space Pack, both of which were also protected by the same armor system as the main body of the Akatsuki. Let's start by having a look at the Oowashi. As you can probably already tell from its shape, the Oowashi was a development from the Ootori. It gave the Akatsuki atmospheric flight capabilities, and for weapons, it came with two Type 73F Kai high-energy beam cannons. They extend when in use, and they also have an optional handle, presumably for better firing accuracy. And as an added bonus, the pack could also detach itself in combat to act as a support fighter. It could either be remote controlled by the pilot or by the onboard AI. But things get really crazy with the Shiranui Space Pack and its M531R guided mobile beam turret system, Orb's take on the Dragoon system. Its performance is roughly equal to that of the first generation Dragoon system, used by machines like the Providence, but despite being a little bit outdated, it was definitely able to compensate. It consisted of 7 turrets with 3 beam cannons each, being a main one and 2 sub ones. Although in the anime, it seems to only use the main beam cannon for offensive purposes, with the other ones only being used for generating a beam barrier. And not only is this beam barrier powerful enough to stop a positron cannon, it is also large enough to completely envelop an allied warship, or a number of allied mobile suits. These are some really versatile things. Their only downside is that they require a pilot with high spatial awareness to operate. And if these packs weren't enough, later on the Akatsuki Gundam would also be outfitted with the Zeus silhouette. But since that equipment was developed for the Destiny Gundam Spec 2, we'll talk more about that when I get to the Destiny Gundam's development history. So simply put, when in the right hands, the Akatsuki Gundam was a beast. While the designers' first goal of making a mass production unit was a failure, their new goal of making a Gundam type that was capable of single-handedly turning the tide of a battle was a resounding success. Because when the Akatsuki first hit the battlefield, it did exactly that. With Kigali Yula Atha behind the controls, the Akatsuki was able to prevent Orb from suffering another crushing defeat. And later on, the machine would be passed on to Mula Flaga, an ace pilot who had the high spatial awareness required to operate the Shiranui pack. For Orb, this truly was the zenith of the Strike Gundam. But there is still one more Striker pack that we have to talk about, the P204QX Lightning Striker. This Striker pack first saw the light of day when the Alliance wanted to extend the combat time of the Strike by 150%. They first contracted IDEX, who managed to lay down the groundwork for this pack, but then ran into problems meeting the required 150%. They thought they could simply use larger and heavier batteries to solve this problem, and then offset the hit to its mobility with stronger thrusters. But they then realized that these required larger cooling systems for use in space, which added weight, which required even stronger thrusters, etc. So they were back to square one. And this is where Morgan Raid came in with their superior battery technology, creating the Lightning Striker that we all know today. It comes with extra batteries on the back skirts and a very unique looking backpack that combines thrusters, heat sinks, and range finding sensors. Sensors that were of course very useful for its main weapon, the Type 70-31 electromagnetic cannon, or a sniper railgun if you prefer, because on Earth it could hit targets up to 120 kilometers away, 75 miles, and in space up to 10,000 kilometers away, about 6,200 miles. And if that still wasn't enough, according to the metal build figure, it could also enter an ultra-long range mode in space that could effectively hit a target at 380,000 kilometers, which is a lot of miles. Despite this though, during testing, it was actually deemed more successful for its other feature. Because it had so much battery power, it could easily provide energy to the other machines on the battlefield. But unlike the IWSP, the Lightning Striker wouldn't be of too much use to Orb. Because of reasons, they never handed the prototype of the Striker pack over to the Alliance. But when they finally decided to test it out for themselves with the Strike Gundam and Mulaflaga, it got tangled up in a fight that forced them to abandon the pack, where the Alliance then managed to recover it, repaired it, and finally got it to use themselves. Also, in some depictions, you will see more weapons on the Lightning Striker, but officially it only has the railgun, which can also be stored on the lower arms when not in use. And then really finally, beyond these immediate developments, the Strike also had an influence on other units produced by Orb. For example, the backpack of the M1 Astray and the Eclipse Gundam, which got its own Striker pack system. So, to go back to my statement from the beginning, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the Strike was an extremely influential mobile suit, and we're barely even halfway done. We still have to look at what the Alliance and Librarian Works did with the Strike, and at the development of the Strike's famous support fighter, which I think I'll be tackling next. So, I'll see you then. Don't forget to check out FX Creations' Gundam Seed lineup with the link down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.